Now, just a few minutes before we came on air, a sudden social media post from Donald Trump turned all his tariff plans upside down again. Based on the lack of respect China has shown to the world markets, he declared, "I am hereby raising the tariff charge by the United States of America to 125%. As for the countries which he said had not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape or form, I've authorised a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%. It took several questions to the White House press secretary to establish that this was a universal flat rate and not on top of the existing 10% already imposed. That's all perfectly clear then, is it? Well, in our first report tonight, here's our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy.
I know what the hell I'm doing. I know what I'm doing, and you know what I'm doing too.
Last night, President Trump claimed he knew what he was doing as he unleashed a barrage of reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries around the world.
Thank you. The president has just announced a 90-day pause.
But in the last hour, yet more chaos, as the president abruptly announced on social media a 90-day pause. The stock market surged as investors took heart and screens quickly turned green. But exempt from the tariff pause was China, on which Trump hiked levies for the second time in 24 hours, this time to 125%. Beijing had already retaliated with an increased 84% levy on US goods, its finance minister earlier insisting Beijing would not back down. We will continue to take resolute and strong measures to safeguard our legitimate rights and interests, he said. There was also retaliation from Europe that targeted iconic products like Harley-Davidson motorbikes with a new 25% duty that will also hit American chickens, soybeans and ice cream. The incoming German Chancellor was equally resolute. We do not yet know what direction the international situation will head, he said, but that's why our message today is all the more clear. We want to and we will help shape the shift in the world for Germany. That doesn't sound like countries cozying up to Donald Trump, as he claimed last night.
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir.
With a global trade war underway, Trump's Treasury Secretary spoke at a bankers' conference this morning, perhaps to try and calm jittery nerves, though he didn't sound particularly convinced himself.
I can tell you that there is a little uncertainty, but that in general, the companies that I've spoken to, the people who have come, the CEOs who have come into Treasury, tell me that the economy is very solid. We got some very good jobs numbers last Friday. So, you know, I think that we are in pretty good shape.
This will be the largest tax increase for the American people.
But that wasn't the message in Congress today, during a second grilling of Trump's trade official.
The numbers speak for themselves. $3,800 higher prices for American consumers, 900 laid off U.S. auto workers, trillions in lost retirement savings, which would be the biggest tax increase in our history.
Perhaps acknowledging that pain, at least the chaos his policies are causing in global markets, Donald Trump has now called a pause, a welcome reprieve from the turmoil he's created.
Siobhan Kennedy, well, was today's climb down the result of market movements overnight as confidence in the US economy declined and investors rushed to offload government debt? With me now is our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi. So let's start with UK debt. What had been happening?
Well, look, the whole thing is quite complicated because we've seen in the last half an hour that US stock markets, as Siobhan was saying, have all bounced higher. You know, you've got the Dow Jones. I'm going to start there. I'm going to go for the good news first and then get to the bad news, Krish. Dow Jones up 6%. NASDAQ, that's where all the US big tech companies are. They've shot up even higher, up 9%. all those hard-hit American companies like Nike, Apple, Delta Airlines, which had been the main casualties of this tariff war, are seeing double-digit share growth at the moment. And the conclusion of this turmoil is that I think this is kind of, it's that famous saying from Bill Clinton's advisor that if the reincarnation exists, I want to come back as the bond market because that's what really has power. And I'm going to show you up until an hour ago, there was a fear that not just prices were nosediving in shares, but also credit. This is the US Treasury market, 30-year debt. That should be the safest of safe places to be. And you can see just as tariffs begin, that's the white line, you see it shoot up to 5%. Now, that is really bad news for the administration and traders and market analysts all talking about what's the circuit breaker, what's going to stop this.
And that was the opposite of what they intended.
That's the opposite. And it's very strange as well to see bonds go up, government debt go up. This means there is a loss of confidence in not just shares, but actually the USA. And you were asking a moment ago about what does this mean for UK debt? Well, we're going to bring up another chart for you because, of course, this spreads not just across the US and to other corporate bonds, but also to the UK. You can see the UK debt price, which was already quite spicy, Krish, has gone up to 5.64%. And that is all because people are losing confidence.
Is that trust territory?
Well, the similarities with trust, that is away from trust. We're still away from trust in terms of the change in gilt yield. So that's the highest level since 1998, but it's not the biggest move which we saw with trust. The similarities with trust, Krish, is that we've seen some chaos in the market. Prices going up, going down, crashing all about, and moving critically to the credit market. And you've got big leveraged positions, which means that prices are moving very quickly, very violently. Things like oil going down, things like the dollar going down, things like US Treasuries going down. When that happens, Krish, policymakers worry not just about prices, not just about recession, but does the whole market system break somewhere? And it is that kind of question about, is there enough liquidity? Is something going to break along the way that I think has stayed his hand?
And this is not over, is it?
Well, no, it's definitely not over. It's a reprieve. As Siobhan was saying, it's staying his hand for 90 days. But remember, China, which is the world's second biggest economy, still has tariffs. Not only still has tariffs, but he's increased the tariffs. Trump's increased the tariffs to 125%. Now, that is still going to have ramifications. And even when you look at the rest of the world, he's only given a 90-day pause. So companies, markets, fund managers, policymakers, they're still not clear where the policy is going to land. And that is going to lead to a whole bunch of volatility. If we have a look at my last graphic that I'm going to show you, this is the VIX. People call it the fear index. And you can see how it shot up on tariff day. That means people don't really know what's going to happen. And when people don't know, then things become a lot riskier. And that's when policymakers... Because
it's no longer clear what the purpose of his tariffs are now, is it? Yeah. It might not be about rebalancing the world economy after all.
Yeah, is it a negotiating tool or, is he just trying to bully everybody?
Thanks, Helia. Matt?
Well, I think we should be able to speak to Siobhan Kennedy now. Siobhan, tell us what the very latest is that you've heard from the White House.
Well, Matt, just first of all, what a roller coaster of a day, of a week this has been, having insisted pretty much on a daily basis that he was not for budging, he would not change his policy. That is exactly what Donald Trump has abruptly and suddenly done today with this pause that he's put in place. He said that he's done it because 75 countries, he said on his Truth Social platform, have called representatives of the United States, his Department of Commerce and others, and begged, as he would see it, to make a deal. Of course, the one country that has not done that is China, and he is claiming today that it was China's lack of respect that it has shown to the world markets that has made him make this pause. Of course, there's been chaos in the world markets. He seems to be blaming China for that, and he's raised the levy instead on China to 125%. That was on his Truth Social platform. In the last few moments, we have heard from the White House. His press secretary has come out onto the lawn there with his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Now, Caroline Levitt has said many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. She said the entire world is calling the United States, not China, because they need our markets. She spoke alongside, as I said there, the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent. Let's hear what he had to say now.
China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced a tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
If I could just, excuse me.
Well, the markets, we've seen them turn green. There is some relief here. But remember, this is only a 90-day pause to give some time for those negotiations and for some deals to perhaps kick in. Doesn't mean they necessarily will. And remember, he is still implementing a 10% tariff. So chaos will still ensue, I think, and prices still stand to go up. So this is a temporary reprieve, but I don't think everybody here, certainly ordinary Americans, will not be breathing a sigh of relief for too long.
Siobhan, thanks very much indeed. Well, Wendy Cutler is a former diplomat who spent years negotiating trade agreements between the US and countries across Asia. She's now at the Asia Society Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., and joins me here on the roof. It's good to see you on such an extraordinary day. You must be feeling a bit dizzy, rather like us. Did Donald Trump blink?
Clearly, I think the pause shows that the administration was getting a bit nervous about the economic fallout of these tariffs. So this 90-day pause, while applying to most countries but not China, is a welcome development.
So is it people like Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who's a very rich man in his own right and credited for having a big financial brain, and the other titans of Wall Street who rang up Donald Trump over recent days and says, lay off, you got to be kidding?
Well, I'm sure they played a role, but one thing we've learned about this president, he has his own mind and makes his own decisions based on his own considerations.
Now, what about China? I mean, 125% tariff on China, that's unprecedented, isn't it?
It's unprecedented, and frankly, it ends trade between the two countries. Right. China's already responded with higher tariffs, and I think that what's now going to happen is both sides have exhausted their tariff application, so now they may look elsewhere to other tools that and other weapons they can use against each other, and that concerns me.
And who is this more damaging for, China or the US?
I think it depends who you ask.
But what do you think, as someone who's dealt with both sides?
I think both sides are going to feel pain from this. But given China's relatively weak economy, I think the pain will be greater on them. But I also think that the Chinese are in it for the long term. I think that they can endure, and Xi Jinping will do what he needs to do to help them weather through this storm.
They have a higher pain threshold than American society, presumably.
Yes, yeah.
And I mean, to what extent is this about politics and not really about trade?
Look, it's hard to distinguish both of them. I think this started as a genuine trade dispute. I think now it's getting into politics, but it's also getting into personalities of people and how they negotiate. And let's just say both China and the U.S. right now, neither is blinking and both are escalating.
The Trump administration has repeatedly said, as have other administrations, that China has used unfair trade practices, stealing intellectual property rights, etc. We know the score. Do they have a point, and will this redress some of that, do you think, in the future?
Well, clearly, there are valid concerns about not only the openness of the Chinese market, but how can you compete against Chinese companies that are receiving subsidies and all types of financial assistance and assurances from their government? So these issues need to be addressed.
And those countries like Indonesia and Vietnam or Cambodia, which were hit with massive tariffs, partly because they were doing some of China's business and then selling it to the US, presumably they live another day, don't they? Or another 90 days.
Yes, but during these 90 days, they are going to be pressured to take a number of steps, including reining in Chinese investment and Chinese trade that's moving through their borders.
And from your experience of dealing with trade issues, do you think this is a lasting reprieve? I mean, what's going to happen after 90 days? Are we back to where we were on Wednesday? I guess you have to be a psychologist more than an economist, right?
90 days right now in this world seems like a long time. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for our negotiators that they can find some solutions with countries, particularly in Asia.
And just briefly, we know that the European Union was planning, a very calibrated response of their own tariffs against the US that hadn't yet kicked in. Presumably, they're part of that reprieve, aren't they?
The way I read it, they are, even though they just announced today some tariffs in response to earlier tariff measures from the Trump administration. So I think they're also given the reprieve. And again, I think the EU and the US can use that time to negotiate.
Wendy Cutler, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, also today, Canada has confirmed that it will impose a 25% retaliatory tariff on certain vehicle imports from the United States. A short time ago, Prime Minister Mark Carney hit out at Mr. Trump, accusing him of rupturing the global economy. Listen.
We've seen the impact of this chaos. Volatility in global financial markets, retirement savings being put at risk. And here in Canada, President Trump's tariffs are threatening Canadian labor and Canadian business. They're putting people's livelihoods in jeopardy.
And I think we should add that we don't really know whether that 25% retaliatory tariff from Canada still applies. Now, joining me here is Mark DePlacido, a policy advisor for the conservative economic think tank American Compass. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Same question to you. Did Trump blink?
Yes, I think last week what we saw was the president really reset the entire U.S. trade paradigm and as an effect, the world paradigm. And there were sort of three core elements to that strategy. There was the 10% global tariff that's still in effect, higher tariff rates on China with the goal of shifting world markets as a whole away from the Chinese market, and reciprocal tariffs. Obviously, the open question is sort of the third leg of that policy. I think we're going to hear a lot over the coming 90 days, reinforcing that idea that Trump is still committed to balance with all of our trade partners and balance overall.
You're crediting him with a kind of a cunning master plan. It sounds like he's making up stuff on the back of a cigarette packet.
I think the president has made clear that the end goal is balance, and that balance can't just be struck between China and the United States anymore. It has to apply to the world. And we saw in the first administration, when the administration really did stick to China, China was able to reach the American market through third countries. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of pressure on allies and other trade partners to get that balance.
But those third countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, they've got their 90-day reprieve. Those factories making those Chinese goods are still in those countries. What makes you think they won't carry on making Nikes and selling them to you guys?
Well, I think that's the point of the entire policy. The president has been flagging the trade deficit as an issue since the middle of the 80s. He ran against 17 other candidates in 2016 and a handful of other candidates in the last two cycles. And the American people and Republican Party have continued to pick him to lead our economy into a new era. I think he's going to continue to hammer on that balance and set up a new incentive structure in our economy to reshore and bring back industry.
But on that point, the whole idea of this was to give those jobs back to the Rust Belt that had disappeared to China and other countries years ago. That's not going to happen now, is it?
I think it will happen. I think
But
we're
why?
already seeing trillions of dollars of investment into the country, both from domestic companies who have offshored in the past and
Trillions?
foreign.
Really?
Trillions. The administration is now saying there's up to $7 trillion of pledged investment, and we're going to see increased capacity in the country as a result.
But he's just buckled and decided to give a 90-day reprieve, which means that those jobs that were supposed to go to the Midwest are probably not coming anytime soon. At the end of the day, Donald Trump is going to listen to his rich friends more, is he not?
I think that's
a
completely unfair characterization. I think that's a completely unfair characterization. No, the president kept a 10% global tariff in place on all of our trade partners and over 100% tariff on China. He's going to continue to keep pressure on our other trading partners and make very clear to him that he is willing to stick out the pain. He's stuck it out for a week after $6 trillion disappeared off of our stock index. He's clearly not concerned about Wall Street over Main Street.
But even yesterday he was saying, you know, there's not going to be a reprieve. We're going to carry on with this policy. And today he blinked, he buckled.
And after a week,
the markets at the end of the day is something that he listens to.
No, I think he listens to trade partners who are willing to come to the table and cut a deal. And I think he's going to put pressure on those countries and multinational companies in our country to do what's right for the American people and our economy in the long term.
Some of these countries that were given these extraordinary tariffs, like Cambodia, you know, or Laos, or Lesotho, I mean, they didn't buy your stuff because they simply can't afford it. It's not as if they were putting tariffs on your products. They just can't afford to buy American computers or American cars. Wasn't the punishment of those countries just unfair cruelty?
Well, the other side of the question is what the trade deficit represents, which basically represents Americans consuming $1 trillion more than we're producing. America can't afford to buy these goods year after year at a rate of $1 trillion and sustain that in the long term.
And what happens just finally and briefly with China now? I mean, there's a full-on trade war with China, 125% tariffs from your side versus 84% from their side. Where does this end?
I think China has built its entire economy around securing this trade surplus. And systemically, their economy is much more exposed in this trade war than the United States is. Only 25% of our GDP is represented in trade. Theirs is over 35%. Their economy is on much weaker footing, as the previous guest said. I think America is in a good position, and China is going to blink first.
Lots of blinking going on. Mark de Placido, thanks very much indeed.